Okay, we're on stage 4 of this rebuild at this point, and 95% of the transmission is rebuilt. All I'm gonna do is do the last 5% on the bench, because I like to build everything on the bench. And then we're gonna talk about case prep. We're gonna prep the case, and that's gonna be about the sum of it for today's video. So if you made it through the last video, then this is a cakewalk. But we're just gonna do that, get the case prepped, show you what needs to be done there, and then the final video will be the whole assembly, and we're just gonna finish this thing up. So stick around, we're gonna get to it, and I'm gonna show you everything that I like to do as far as building it on the bench, and then we'll go from there. Okay, the first thing we're gonna do is I finally got the center support, and this is something that should be done. Doesn't have to be done every time, but since I'm doing this whole trans absolutely perfect, we might as well do this. This is the old center support. If you look at this really close, there's a little bit of hammer in here where it rides in the case. And what they do is they just machine this down, machine those lugs down to fit a snap ring in the case. That's 51 thousandths. So what they do is they just machine 51 thousandths off of those lugs. That way you can put a full snap ring to where the center support will ride in the case. And if you come over here, when you look in this case, it goes right down in here, and you can see how little support that center support would have without that snap ring. And that's basically a good upgrade from the factory situation that's going on. So we're gonna do that too. And then we're going to, we got the center support itself, the housing. This is the housing. This is basically all the fluid channels. And they give you this in the Sonics kit. It's got nice little rubber seals that go down in here. That seal goes in there. And then we're gonna bolt this center support in. And then that's gonna be good to go. Okay, so went ahead and put this, put the center support housing together with the actual center support itself. And if you look at this really close, I just have the 3 bolts in there. I torqued in about 15 foot-pounds, and I actually put Loctite on these bolts. And we got our gasket in there. Everything's good to go with that. And at this point, what I want to do is do my air checks, because without doing air checks, you're not positive that your clutch is good. And if it's not, basically you have to pull your transmission back out. So air checks are so important. But what we're gonna do, we got our steel sealing rings. Go ahead and put my sealing rings on. Lock them in. Make sure they're nice and free. Make sure nothing got damage there. Take a little bit of lube. Just lube them, because they air check a lot better when they have fluid on them. So that's good. Then we have our direct drum goes against the center support. So we have our thrust washer. Always a thrust washer between any moving part. A little bit of lube, assembly lube. Stick that on there, that's good to go. A little bit of my juice. And I sanded out with 320, if you remember. And I'm expecting this thing to air check perfect. And we're just gonna slide our drum right down on there, nice and easy. Spin it, make sure there's no binding. And look at that, that's money. Just a little bit of air pressure. Listen, that clutch it's perfect. It's perfect. And I can see that everything's working. The clutch is applying. I didn't do anything wrong there. I mean, you can't get a better air check than that. And that's all because I did that 320 for the rings. So we're gonna take this off. I know that that's good to go. That clutch is happy. Now, one thing on the other video, Who Moved My Cheese video, if you look at this bench, I got these bearings and thrust washers left. And I'm down to 3 bearings and 2 thrust washers. Now this bearing, one thing I'd like to do when I stay organized is so I know that all my bearings, if I'm missing one, it'll show up on the bench. And this bearing actually goes down on this forward drum, right in there. So I missed that on the last video, but that bearing goes in there. And then I already have my sealing rings on the forward drum. And all I'm gonna do, and that bearing rides against this hub, another moving part. I'm just gonna put a little juice on there and do my air check. Nice and free, everything's happy. And see how that piston is moving up and that bell valve spring is flexing. We talked about that when we built the clutch. And that's another reason to have a nice tight clutch pack, because the more clearance there, the more that spring is gonna flex. But this thing is money. Beautiful air check. Can't get any better than that. It just doesn't. So we got our forward clutch pack is good to go. We got our bearing on there. Everything is exactly where it needs to be. So at this point, I'm just gonna go ahead and assemble everything up from the pump to the back. So at this point, we've got a thrust washer in there. I'm gonna go ahead and put these two together. Got the clump. I know all my clutches are splined. Turn it over. And then if you come over here, we're getting down to another thrust washer that goes on the pump. It's nice and flimsy. No cracks in the back of it. Stick that to the pump. And then take my sealing rings, and these are scarf cut rings. You can see the angle on that ring. If you put it this way, it's wrong. You can see how that doesn't fit. So we're gonna go ahead and put our rings in. Just so you can squeeze these a little bit. Stick them in, make sure my ring is in the right position. Find a little put a little bit of assembly lube on there just to hold them in till I air check. Scarf cuts in the right way. A little juice. See how that thing is popping out. You gotta be real careful with that. So all you do is just a little bit. Get it down on there. Make sure it's in right. Happy. And then put a little fluid in here. And there is a bearing. This is one of the last bearings. That thing's good to go. This goes on the pump right here. And I'm just gonna pre-lube my bearing just a little bit. Just enough to make it happy. That's all you need. Everything's lubed up. Got my overdrive, overrun clutch drum here. I'm just gonna put this down on where it goes. Everything is together. And then we'll just air check that. Okay, now, oh, there it is. My air checker, I need a new tip on this thing. It's wore out. Listen to that. That's money. Perfect air check. So my whole point with doing that 320 where the rings ride is to have a perfect air check. It just makes me happy too. So we got the forward clutch, the direct clutch, and the overrun clutch. Those are all the 3 clutch drums in this trans that are air checking perfect. And now I'm just gonna build this thing all the way up. So far this thing is money. Okay, so after reviewing the video, this direct clutch actually sounded like it wasn't air checking it actually as good as it was. Maybe the camera was so close, so I'm just gonna go through this again real quick and just to show you this thing is money. It's got a little bit of leakage just because the rings still have to break in, but if you were here at the bench with me, you would see that it's absolutely perfect. So that's good. Okay, so we got our overrun clutch drum, the whole overdrive assembly on the pump. We're down to 1 thrust washer and 1 bearing. And this last bearing goes between the center support and the overdrive assembly. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of pre-lube on my bearing. Stick my center support on because that's where it rides in the trans. Just like that. And then I got my forward and direct drum together. So we're gonna go ahead and just put this whole assembly together. And again, this is fighting me a little bit. Oh, come on. Sometimes you can line these splines up with a pick, make it a little bit easier. Because I don't like fighting stuff. If it's not working, I find a better way. And there it is. Clunk right in, got my good clunk. Little prelude. Got my planet. And my sun gear and shell. So I got this whole assembly here. And if we carefully put this down on here, clunk. So we got our overrun clutch drum, the overdrive assembly, the center support, direct drum, forward drum, entire gear train is all together. This is how it goes in the transmission. And then we have our whole rear assembly. One thing is that Sonic's kit came with some thrust washers for adjusting your end play. I'm just going to show you that real quick. There's a washer here. See that washer there? That's to tighten up the end play, and we're going to check the end play on final assembly. But as of now, we got all this together. And then I can just plunk this down on here. And that's the entire transmission from where it bolts to the case to the pump. And I just like looking at that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. And then this last thrust washer goes behind the transmission on your parking gear. And now I know I'm not missing anything. That's one of the reasons for staying organized when you do these things. That way, I've learned that when I have a whole transmission together and the pump is in, and I look over and there's a bearing on my bench, I know I got to tear it all back apart to figure out where that bearing went. So this is one of the reasons I do this, to make sure it's fully together. And again, I just like looking at this. Pretty cool. It's kind of like a tower. Okay, so now that we have most of the assembly here, there's two other parts that aren't included in this entire transmission here, and one is the second gear clutch, which goes in here, and then the overdrive clutch. And we'll just go ahead and assemble them real quick. And there's 4 O-rings. These two middle ones are the same size for the inside on the second gear and the overdrive. So what I'm gonna do is just put the second gear in, get it seated, spinning, make sure my seal's in. And I'm gonna go ahead and put this overdrive one in, get it down in the groove, work it around nice and easy. This one's a little more difficult because it's way down in that cavity. And then just work it right in the groove. Being very careful with that pick because it's sharp. You don't want to poke a hole in your O-ring and you're pulling your trans back out. So we got our 2 inner seals in. Then we got 1 big one and 1 small one. Second gear piston, make sure the O-rings in, or the lip seal's in good. Now this overdrive has the lip seal. This is probably the toughest one in this. Getting this lip seal in here. The 4R100s have a molded piston, and you don't have to worry about this. It just falls in. But the E4ODs actually have a lip seal here. And just got to work it slowly. Doing lip seals, got to be patient. Get that in there and run my pick around, because I can't really feel, well actually I can kind of feel that. Always spinning stuff, because everything that happens in the transmissions, it's constantly spinning. Just makes sense to me. So that's good. A little juice all the way around, outside, inside. Now there's 2 check balls in here. These are the check balls that I seated in the direct drum. There's one there. You can shake it and feel that it's loose. It's not stuck from like soap scum or anything like that. So I just put a little lube on each one. Overdrive in second. Little lube. All the way around. Now, this piston has a wide gap right here, and that gap needs to go in the center support here, because this actually comes up through here and applies second clutch right there. So that gap basically needs to be where these holes are for the feed holes for the clutches. So if you look at this center support is going to be about right in there where the feed holes are. So you just get it close, and then when we're putting it together, then that's when you actually line it up perfect. But see, it's off right now. I need to get it closer to where it actually rides, and it just pops right in. perfect. So we got our second gear piston, our center support. Then we'll do the overdrive. Go ahead and lube that up. And a little lube on the piston. Lube on the piston. A lot of redundancy in transmissions, but it's all important. Pop right in. Now, one thing I want to talk about, and we got the return spring. When I pulled this transmission apart, it had this return spring, and they pop off all the time. When I pulled this out, this snap ring that holds this down actually was popped off, if you remember, on the teardown. And then Sonics makes this, a lot of companies make them, but I'm using the Sonics. It's a spiral snap ring that locks itself. If you look at that really close, it locks itself once you get this thing seated in here. That way the snap ring can't pop out. So we're gonna do that. That came with the kit that I bought. So we have the whole second clutch and overdrive piston and center support together. That's ready to go. And we're getting real close to being able to load the case here. So that's good. Whole gear train. This is the load. This is the only clutch left, except for this is the second gear here. And we talked about that. Who moved my cheese? Got the Borg Warner clutches. Clutch stack is ready. That goes basically right there in the case. Then we have the overdrive clutch and steels. That goes right there in the case. And then lastly, we got the low reverse. There's 6 clutches. We got our clutch pack, steels clutches, ready to go. And this thing is basically ready to put in the case. And that is the reason why I build a transmission on a bench. Because all I have to do, literally, once this case is prepped, I could have the pump in it in 20 minutes. Because I know I have everything ready to go. So that's the reason I do that. One of the reasons. And again, I just like to look at this kind of stuff. So next we're gonna do case prep, and then that probably will be it for this video. But we're looking good now. We're on the downhill slide. Okay, this is one of the moments where I have the entire transmission ready to go in the case, and this thing is money, air checks, parts, it's all ready to go. And I know other builders out there go through this feeling when they're to this point. And this is my best castaway rendition. But this is like, look what I have created! I have made fire! I have made fire! So that's kind of the point where you get when you are at that point to load the case up and everything is good and happy. So for what it is, that's my take, my castaway take, because Tom Hanks does it. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, I've built my fire and burned it. We got the case prep. And then it's basically just putting this thing together, but for video's sake, I'm not gonna do all the prep. I'm gonna show you what I do. And then once I'm building it on the next video, you'll see everything that I've done, and I'll point it out. But if you come in here close, if you look at this thing's already been through the machine. It's clean, but you see all this crust. All this has to be cleaned up for that new gasket to seal. So basically that needs to be clean. I usually sand that with 320, scrape all the crust off, 320. You have to check every single bolt hole. Matter of fact, I think we have some bolt holes here. If you look at that, see that right there? Looks like the threads are starting to peel out of these holes. So I'm gonna have to check all these holes, and if any need to be done, this is the time to do it. You don't wanna have your transmission all together and then valve body on and start creating metal, putting helicoils in. So now is the time. And that one right there definitely needs a helicoil. There's no threads there. So the reason for that is somebody over tightened the pan. It's all about torque with just being a mechanic, but especially with transmissions. So I'm gonna have to prep that surface for the new gasket, the new seal, I should say, and helicoil that. This transmission's never been apart other than the pan off, so I don't have to worry about somebody had over torqued all the bolts. I check all my threads for the valve body, make sure that's all good. Check the threads in the rear. And just as important, I'm gonna check all these pump bolt threads, because that's the last thing you need when you're getting ready to put the pump in and realize you have a stripped out pump bolt. Then you're just putting metal down in the trans as you're trying to put a helicoil in that thing, which I've done before, but I've learned my lesson. So we're gonna check all that. And this is where the pump seal goes in. I generally take 320 and sand that out. Any kind of crust where the seal goes in, the pump goes in and that seal has to seal, make sure that surface is nice and easy so that pump goes in on final assembly without any problems. Now, also, if you look down in this case, this is where the second clutch steels ride, and you got to make sure they're not all hammered out. This is where we're putting that new snap ring and center support in, so that's covered. Everything's good there. All the way down in here is where your low reverse piston rides with your lip seals. Now, if this thing would have been blown up, you got to get down. I do it anyway, but I'm going to take 600 sandpaper and sand that case where the lip seals ride to make sure that there's no scuffing and scarring and it doesn't rip my new lip seal on the outside and on the inside. So we're going to do that. And then look at this here. There's two bushings in here where the rear, where the output shaft goes. A little bit of play there. And right now, your lube pressure is coming in out of your cooler, going into the center right here, where you get the lube coming in. The lube comes in this output shaft and it goes through the center of the shaft, and you got a bunch of holes here that feed the lubrication system of the entire gear train. Yeah, you got to make sure that shaft is completely, if this was all blown up, you might even have to take that plug out and clean that out really good, because there could be a bunch of metal hiding in that shaft. But this thing had no metal in it. It's perfect. I brake cleaned it, air dried it, no problem. But we're going to change these bushings, and this is part of the Sonics kit. This is a one-piece bushing. I like these. If you look at it close, it's got three lube, I don't know what you call it, places for lube, and then on the back of it, it's got one. So it actually tells you right here, it says grooves towards the front. So you got three in the front and one in the back. And what that does is it gets more lube to the very back of the trans. So you won't, basically all you got to do is put that thing in the right way. It's not that hard, but this being a one piece, you got to get that hole lined up with your case so your lube will come through and you get feed to your gear train. Pretty much that simple. I'm going to Loctite this in, and that thing is money. No problems there. Okay, so we are basically ready to load the case. Once I get this whole case prepped and everything, it's pretty much 100% built as far as the guts go and the valve body. All the hydraulic circuits are good to go. The next video is basically just me assembling this entire transmission until it's ready to go back in the truck. So that's the plan on this. We pretty much went through case prep. Anything I missed on this case prep, I will mention on the next video. And the final video will be the transmission sitting here on the bench with the pan on it, pump in, and putting the converter in it so it can go back in the truck. So I know it was a lot. It's been interesting for me to do these videos while building a transmission and trying to explain it completely. But I hope you guys got a lot out of this 4 or 5 series video that I've done. And I know there's good information in there if you just go back and watch maybe some that you haven't seen yet. But that's basically where we're at. And the next video, we're just gonna cover everything that hasn't been covered to this point yet. So we'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.